Issue 2, Cantor kaput.
I know there's a lot of long faces here tonight, and it's disappointing, sure.
It was not only a disappointing defeat for Virginia's 7th District U.S. House of Representatives and House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, it was a stunning one. On Tuesday, Virginia's primary election day, Leader Cantor succumbed to a Republican primary challenger named Dave Bratt by an 11-point clobbering, 56% to 44%. Bratt pummeled Cantor, principally for supporting amnesty for illegal immigrants in the U.S. And Bratt also campaigned heavily on cutting U.S. government spending. What makes this Bratt win even more incredible is that Cantor, a 7-term congressman, outspent Bratt $5 million to Bratt's $122,000. That's a ratio of over 40 to 1. Bratt is a relatively unknown economics professor at Randolph-Macon College, whereas Cantor is the Republican House Majority Leader in the chain of command, number 2 in power, behind House Speaker John Boehner. In other words, Cantor is a Capitol Hill giant, as confirmed by noted political historian and University of Virginia College professor Larry Sabato.
This is truly a political earthquake, not just in Virginia, but nationally. When you have the House Majority Leader who's next in line for the speakership and probably would have been Speaker knocked off, you know something big has happened.
Now Cantor will resign that position at the end of July, a move already causing a scramble among Republicans. Question, how do you account for the downfall of Eric Cantor? Mort Zuckerman.
Well, you know, it turns out, first place, in immigration, what he was talking about was the children of people who came into this country illegally, okay, children who were born here. They're the ones, even if they brought their children in who weren't born here, they're the ones he wanted to give citizenship to. And frankly, I support that. But there's no doubt but that what he got involved with, and on the wrong side of which, is this whole issue of immigration. He was seen as somebody who was, and that's what turned him around when all of the advertising went out. And his advertising, by the way, you're right, he had way, way more money, but he created the identity of his opponent by his attacks on him. So that his actual TV ads worked in counter to his...
Your point is well taken. It was the immigration issue that was the big lever.
That's right.
That led to his being squeezed out of office.
That's right.
Well, it lit the fuse, but the fuse was already there, and that is the Tea Party world and conservatives see any flirting with immigration reform makes you a squish in Washington. He was not conservative enough for the people who were voting in that primary. Yeah. Plus the fact he's a Washington insider. They hate Washington insiders, and the key thing that came out was that he spent more on steak dinners in Washington, you know, for lobbyists and donors and so forth, than Dave Bratt spent for his entire campaign. So there's an anger there, which Pat, I know, appreciates, against the elites and the banks, and any Republican who can tap into that is going to do well in November.
Well, you raise an interesting point, and that is his opponent. Let's take a closer look at Dave Bratt.
It's not about Dave Bratt winning tonight. It's about returning the country to constitutional principles. It's about returning the country to Judeo-Christian principles. To free market principles.
Professor Dave Bratt was considered such a long shot that although he courted National Tea Party money, he didn't get a dime from them. He professes Tea Party ideals, however, and did get grassroots Tea Party support. Here are a few more facts from the Bratt bio. Born Detroit, age 49, married, 2 children, Roman Catholic, education, master's in divinity, Princeton, 1990. Ph.D. Economics, American University, 1995. Professor, Economics and Ethics, Randolph-Macon College, Liberal Arts School, Ashland, Virginia, 1996 and currently. Also, Randolph-Macon, Chairman, Department of Economics and Business. Curious Dr. Bratt will face another professor from Randolph-Macon College, a Democrat, Jack Trammell, in this November's election. Professor Trammell, get this, is also seeking to win the seat of Eric Cantor.
Question, what gives with Randolph-Macon College? Can you speak to that? I mean, you're from, well, you're from all over Great Britain.
Yeah, well, this is, you know, this is serious political country. This is James Monroe country. This is Madison country. You know, this is serious political roots down there. And you know, it's a pretty conservative college for a liberal arts college. And I guess we're going to see Dave Bratt take it. But I mean, the point is...
Let him finish.
All right. I think the point on Eric Cantor's defeat, I'd just say, is I think that immigration was a kind of... The lever where how it worked was... Cantor's problem was he was trying to have a purity contest. He was going to be the purest of the pure guys representing that Tea Party rage and be an ambitious Washington insider who wanted the speakership. And you can't do purity and ambition at the same time. And I think it was that straddle that, that came out.
You heard about the straddle? I just told you about the straddle.
You're missing something, John. First, the amnesty, he got associated with that. Secondly, TV and the web and everything were all caught up in what was going on the border of the United States. 40,000 children came in 3 days and something like that. Secondly, this fellow went after him as a populist. He said all these bankers and these rich guys should have been put in jail, talking about Cantor, but they ended up on Cantor's Rolodex, in which was a terrific line. Listen, let me tell you, the big winner out of this is Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz.
This has opened up a populist, a populist path to the Republican nomination.
Just on immigration, I mean, it's also the case that...
Immigration,
but
it's
on
on the
immigration,
bankers.
you need to explain, I mean, your sort of border thing. Lindsey Graham, Senator of South Carolina, who was the author of the Senate
But he got 56%.
But he won,
But yeah, but he delivered...
Did you see that enormous rally for Ted Cruz in Texas over this past weekend, or one removed?
Also, you also got the talk radio, Laura Ingraham and Mark Levin.
They bought in on Cruz?
Well, they were hammered this guy all day.
What guy?
Hammered Cantor constantly.
Right.
I mean, Cantor was ahead by what, 34, 35 points, and he lost by 10.
Question, exit. Who is the most likely contender to replace Eric Cantor as House Majority Leader? Have you thought about this, Pat?
I'm going to go with
top of the head.
I'm going to go with the first guy from Randolph-Macon who took out Cantor.
Yeah, I think that's right. But to see this as a launching pad for Ted Cruz, when admittedly 65,000 people voted in this little race in Virginia, and Cruz can carry Texas 5 times over, but I don't see him doing well in a lot of blue states, part of the battleground states that decide the presidency.
David.
To sit, I think, on Eleanor's point on Ted Cruz, the way I look at it is to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office, you need more or less 60 million people to vote for you. I mean, give or take. Yes, there's an electoral college, but basically you need 60 million people. I do not think there are 60 million Ted Cruz voters in this country.
There's a path to the nomination, I said.
To the nomination, possibly.
Mort?
I agree. I think that I agree with what was just said, to wit that Ted Cruz, who is an extraordinary speaker and a very magnetic politician, in my judgment, does not have a chance to win the election. He may win the nomination, but in that case, it'll be a suicidal vote, in my judgment, for the Republican Party.
All well stated. Issue 3, Abbott's Asian age.
I'm here to thank the United States for its deepening engagement in our region. I'm here to further entrench our security and our economic cooperation. I'm here to celebrate the extraordinary friendship between the Australian and the American peoples, and I'm thrilled to have you coming to the G20 in November, because we have a very important job in November in Brisbane to accelerate economic growth around the world so that we have more prosperity and more jobs.
Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, visited the U.S. this week. Prime Minister Abbott was elected Prime Minister in an upset election last year. He began his U.S. trip in New York City by a morning drive with New York firemen from his hotel to the 9/11 Memorial and the New York Stock Exchange. Later, he addressed the American-Australian Association, where he spoke to 200 business leaders. Prime Minister Abbott heads Australia's Liberal Party, Liberal, which down under means conservative. He delivered a pro-business message to the business leaders and, indirectly, to President Obama. That included blunt disagreement with the contention that climate change is the most important issue of our time. President Obama's view. In a meeting with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations, Abbott reaffirmed his opposition to a global climate treaty with strict caps on carbon emissions. But Abbott's most remarked remarks came at a business lunch where he said, quote, "I'm looking forward to the coming Asian century. The Asian century will be an Indian century, a Japanese century, a Korean century, and an Indonesian century, as well as a Chinese one. The Asian century will be an American century, too, because America is a Pacific power, as well as an Atlantic one," he notes. Asia needs America involved. The world wants America to succeed. The world needs America to succeed, unquote. If that formulation sounds convoluted, it is. Australia is caught in a dilemma between its commercial ties to China and its long-standing allegiance to the U.S.
Question. What is Prime Minister Abbott trying to convey with his arcane formulation of the Asian century as also the American century? David Rennie.
Well, it sounded a bit like a kind of food court, didn't it, with all the different Asian countries. What he's trying to do is to sort of thread the needle. In Australian politics, you had a man called Paul Keating, who was Prime Minister, whose big thing was that Australia was going to become an Asian country, become much, much closer to Asia. The Conservative who followed him, John Howard, his whole thing was anti-Asian immigration, pushing the idea of America as the closest ally, pushing the idea of Australia under George Bush as the deputy sheriff to George Bush's sheriff. What Tony Abbott is trying to do, who is a Conservative, but China is now a gigantically important trading power, is to try and sort of square the circle, to be a sort of white Anglo-Saxon Western nation, but also keep trading with the Asian world. That's the sort of thing he's trying to square.
A huge part of the Australian economy is directly tied to Asia. On the other hand, they have to look to us on many levels as their principal ally for everything that might or might not happen. So it makes perfect sense. If I were he, I would have, carried it even further. I would have said, we're also very close to Europe. We're close to the North Pole. We're close to the South Pole. It's just being, generous to everybody.
Well, and culturally, I could no more imagine Australia aligning with China than I could imagine, Britain aligning with Russia.
Australia's really changed that. It's a much more Asian country.
The commercial interests are there.
Hold on, Pat. I want to educate you, Pat. There's an author by the name of White, and he wrote a book, The China Choice, and it's influential among Australian politicians and policymakers. The book has sparked a vigorous debate among politicians and policymakers about how to balance Australia's interests. Culturally and historically, Australia is part of the West and supports the U.S. But commercially, this is your point, it has become a resource colony of China, whose economy depends on Beijing.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
Australia is an enormously resource-rich continent.
Right.
And China's resource dependent, and so that tremendous commercial, economic relationship, but historically, politically, culturally, ethnically, they're still with the
Don't forget we have a base there.
And defense-wise, they're with the U.S.
In Darwin.
In Darwin, indeed. What goes on there?
A couple thousand Marines.
What else?
Well, they signed an agreement.
That's all you need.
They signed an agreement this week. There's going to be some sort of NSA-style listening station. The Australian military is going to be doing super secret listening and spying for America.
Is there any nuclear aspect to it?
Australia doesn't have nuclear weapons, but it's friendlier than, say, New Zealand next door, which bans nuclear
Well, do you think we solved that problem for Australia on nuclear weapons? Immigration is doomed not to happen for the duration of Obama's presidency.
You've got it right.
Eleanor.
Not this year, but there's still time after the November election.
I think it's doomed.
I think it's completely doomed.
Completely doomed. Bye-bye.